It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman. 5 teams, 7 years. Most of you know that. I say it every week. I should probably come up with something new. What is new this week is I'm on the call Thursday night. The first game we'll dive into, Lions-Packers, Westwood One, national radio, myself and Ian Eagle. I think the game of the week is on Thursday this week. Should be fantastic. You can always check me out on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. I always post a video of the press box food on Twitter or Instagram, Facebook. I'm on TikTok as well. Try to post there when I can, when I remember. Threads, Blue Sky, either at Ross Tucker NFL or at Ross Tucker Pod. Appreciate those of you that follow on social. I think you'd like it, actually. I really do. Then we got John Daigle. He's the star of this show. He's been my co-host all season. He is a fountain, a veritable treasure trove of information each and every week. I encourage you to follow him on social at NotJDaigle. And just as importantly, go to Establish the Run. Use the code FEAST to get that discount on all the info they got there. It's Adam Levitan, Evan Silva, John, a bunch of different folks, and it is fantastic. I love when I hear from you, from people that I don't really even play fantasy that much anymore, but I really like, the information that John has, or people that like player prop betting. They like John's information. Very, very cool. Keep it coming. At Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod, at NotJDaigle. John, we got 6 teams on buys. Texans, Ravens, Broncos, Commanders, Colts, Patriots. That means we've got 13 games to go to. We'll start with my game. So I always take notes anyway to post on social media at Ross Tucker Pod, but I especially take notes when it's my game because I steal them. I steal your statistical nuggets and I use them for my own purposes during the broadcast. So what do you have for me? What do I need to be aware of? Lions, Packers.
It's going to be a very interesting game. The highest total on the board, over 51 points in this one. And it makes me question it because it's volatile. It could get there, given the elite pieces we have on offense on the board here, but also for what these defenses have become. Let's start with the Packers side of the ball, because in their last 3 games, limiting the new Bears offense under Thomas Brown to 19 points, recall shutting down the 49ers, who were injured without Trent Williams, but holding them to 10 points. And then last week on Thanksgiving, the Packers routed the Dolphins, led them 27-3 until the Dolphins tacked on 2 touchdowns in garbage time. So this is a Packers unit that we're slowly beginning to respect, getting formidable pass rush, especially before the actual postseason. And this game is the one that's going to test them, given what the Lions do on offense. Just a blender of complementary weapons. Even over the last month, getting both Jameson Williams, who has now 19% of the team's targets in 4 consecutive games, and Sam Laporta. Remember, Sam Laporta wasn't really involved much before the bye, just a 10% target share. But now, 6 targets in 3 consecutive games, and 4 of his last 5. It's also tough because this backfield, there is no signal to who they prefer to use in any given game or moment. Dave Montgomery's second in the league in rushing touchdowns with 11. But on the entire year, Jahmyr Gibbs has only 3 more touches than Montgomery. They are just a split tandem backfield from week to week, given what type of physicality Dan Campbell is trying to impose on the other team. That's going to dictate who they use. And so we just don't know for fantasy outside of just starting both because they're 2 running backs in the Lions backfield. But where it gets interesting is the Packers offense side of the ball, because Josh Jacobs has been a menace. Over 100 yards from scrimmage now in 5 consecutive games, including 23.5 touches for 119 yards averaging per week in that span. But over the last month, the Lions' run defense has been really good. Just a combined 2.6 yards per carry allowed to DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, the Jags running backs room, and Joe Mixon. So I do think it's going to be a good litmus test for Josh Jacobs and the Packers offense here, since the way they are trending, they do seem like they are a team that can contend deep into the NFC postseason.
No question. I feel like that's the case. The Packers are cementing themselves one of the best teams in football. We'll see, though, tomorrow night. All right, let's dive into two teams that are not two of the best teams in football. It's the Jets against the Dolphins, John.
And now the Jets defense in 6 games under interim head coach Jeff Ulbrich have allowed 24 fantasy points to quarterbacks in 4 of those 6 contests. And here comes Tua Tagovailoa, who, yes, the Dolphins offense struggled in the freezing cold against the Packers on Thursday night. Just a hard game to travel to in Lambeau, especially on an island game. But even in that time, since week 8 when Tua returned, he leads the league in completing 77.5% of his passes, 13 touchdowns, only 1 pick. In that time as well, it's not Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, as I'm sure their fantasy managers frustratingly know, who lead the team in targets from Tua. It's actually Jonnu Smith, who's been the tight end 6 in points per game in that stretch too. And so I think the obvious path for success here in fantasy is not only Tua, but also Jonnu, and sprinkling in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle as a flex option behind him. Of course, Devon Achane still getting involved as well. Been a top 5 running back in every start with Tua outside of 1. So we continue peppering all those pieces in our lineup. For the Jets, it's a little messier because Aaron Rodgers is seemingly playing the last month, possibly of his career, definitely with the Jets. And the targets have been condensed to both Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson. Wilson, who's not as sexy in the box score this past week, but did have a touchdown fall short, so it could have been better. But where it gets messy is their backfield, because Breece Hall came out of the bye, oddly enough, with a knee injury. That's when you're supposed to heal. And because of that, we saw a season low 52% of their backfield touches for Breece Hall, and instead it was Braylon Allen who was heavily involved, and Hall only saw 1 of the team's 6 running back targets too. So what you do with Breece Hall the rest of the season, I don't know. We're monitoring the injury report to see if this knee injury goes away. But again, we are at the time of the year with the Jets also eliminated from playoff contention, to where perhaps we even see some of these guys shut it down for the end of the season too. So something to be aware of, and I'm certainly concerned for Breece Hall's outlook for fantasy moving forward.
Looking forward to that one. Just because every Aaron Rodgers game that he plays, I'm like impressed. You know, like if he finishes the season, I'll be very impressed.
Yeah.
All right, this is a big game. Falcons, Vikings. John, what is going on with Kirk Cousins?
Massive game, and it seems like every week we pull up Kirk Cousins' stats to show how he's struggling. This most recent one I heard on the broadcast that he didn't reach 36 miles per hour on any of his throws. Just lacking arm strength right now as he was under duress the entire time. We saw him continue just to get mugged in the pocket. And that's my concern here. It's because Brian Flores, Vikings DC, still blitzes at the league's 2nd highest rate. Only Todd Bowles is blitzing at a higher rate on this season. And Kirk Cousins against the blitz has been okay, top 15 in yards per attempt completion rate. But it really just comes down to if you're going to get him under pressure. Can that blitz reach him? Because if so, he does have 8 turnovers, the 2nd most interceptions in the league when he's under pressure, and 23 sacks because he's an immobile option right now under center. So if Flores can reach him, then yes, we are certainly concerned for this offense and Kirk Cousins as a whole. Also concerning that Kyle Pitts, a season low 40% snap rate last week, as they instead got Ray McCloud much more involved in 3 wide sets. Not sure, honestly. I wish I had an answer for everyone. Not sure what's going to happen since we just can't predict how they're going to use Pitts weekly now. So maybe everyone is better off going to waiver wires, picking up someone like Will Dissly, Luke Schoonmaker, and starting him this week. In week 14, the matchup that for most people is the game before the fantasy playoffs, starting them over Kyle Pitts for the volatility instead. For the Vikings too, it's for their backfield becoming a problem that Aaron Jones now 4 fumbles in his last 3 games, including 2 this past week. And that's why when you look in the box score, you see only 5 carries to Cam Akers 4. It seems like the coaching staff and Kevin O'Connell had done away with the thought process of getting Akers involved behind Aaron Jones the past 2 games, but now the fumbling issues, since they have crept up, it may be more of a timeshare moving forward too. So I'm definitely a little bit worried about Aaron Jones' outlook heading into the fantasy postseason, but a spot still where he and especially Bijan Robinson you're going back to for fantasy. Bijan Robinson now over 100 yards from scrimmage in each game over the last month. Had an incredible game as well this past week, but still the Falcons getting that loss just due to Kirk Cousins' performance under pressure.
Next up, it's the Saints and the Giants. Pour one out for my guy Taysom Hill. I'm a big fan, John, of him as a player. Hate this injury for him. What's he, 34 or 35, torn ACL? He still plays, by the way, like a much younger player. I mean, he still plays like he always has. That's a shame, and I'm curious where that lands these other Saints from a fantasy perspective.
For Taysom Hill, it is a shame because Darren Rizzi had really not just got him involved, basically built the offense around Taysom in his 3 games as interim head coach. The last 2 weeks in particular around their bye, Taysom had 17 and 10 touches, 10 this past week, and 7 targets before he got injured. And so, yes, you asked the question, where does it trickle down to? And it's going to get interesting. It is good news outside of Taysom's injury because the Saints are getting back, it seems like, both center Eric McCoy and guard Lucas Patrick for the first time since week 3. And this is a Giants defense that's already allowing a league high in yards per carry. So I do think we're going to have a nuclear game for Alvin Kamara as the Saints can change their identity and get back to running the ball successfully. That also alleviates the pocket for Derek Carr, who struggled immensely under pressure this year. So there is some hopium to continue for Marquez Valdez-Scantling too, who has 4 touchdowns in his only 3 games with the Saints, has really delivered as a deep play that they don't have. And that's the issue for missing Taysom Hill, is that they really don't have another receiving option who has stepped up in place of Chris Olave, let alone trying to ask someone to do so in place of Taysom now. I will say, though, in getting these 2 offensive linemen back, and basically their starting unit from week 1, they're also getting back Kendre Miller this week from injured reserve, who was only put on IR, remember, because Dennis Allen did not like him. Even the rest of the coaching staff, when they were asked after Dennis Allen was released, they were confused because Kendre apparently only had a minor back injury and should not have gone on IR at all. But because he had not been able to stay healthy for his 2 years so far in the league, Allen really had a negative outlook and opinion on him. But Darren Rizzi, when asked about him, already mentioned that he's, quote, chomping at the bit and ready to get Kendre Miller involved immediately. So perhaps they could become a 2-headed backfield and lean on their offensive line protection and run blocking instead now without Taysom, and since they were that gadgety offense because he could do so many different things. We'll look forward to seeing what they do on offense as that answer. But still, as nearly touchdown favorites with a healthy offensive line, I expect the Saints to really lean into the run here. And on the other side of the ball for the Giants, it's still a little tough. The Saints are actually second in yards per carry allowed, so maybe we get a little bit of hope here for Tyrone Tracy. But again, as nearly touchdown dogs, you would expect them to be having to pass the ball to respond against New Orleans' offense. And if that's the case, it's still been a struggle for Malik Neighbors. The best he's finished is the wide receiver 23 in fantasy in these last 6 games without Daniel Jones, peaked at 71 receiving yards, no touchdowns in that span. He's been trending as closer to a wide receiver 3. Not for his own faults, but because of the poor quarterback play that has been happening behind Daniel Jones. So yes, you can continue starting Malik Neighbors, but his ceiling is really removed from this current form of their offense.
Did you say hopium?
Sorry, that's a social media term. Yes, hopium.
I love that.
To instill hopium into offenses, yes.
I love that. I'm going to use that. You know what gives me hopium? Drinking Labatt Blue Light with friends and family, living life to the power of we. That's my hopium. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Okay, what about Carolina? That their offense is coming a little bit in recent weeks, but now they're going against that Eagles defense.
That's the issue, is that it's a week where 6 teams are on bye, lots of valuable quarterbacks for fantasy, including Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson, and so everyone's running to their waiver wire to pick up options. And Bryce Young has played so good over the past month since returning in the starting lineup, not only giving the organization question marks as to what to do with their inevitable top 10 pick and whether they actually lean into Bryce Young rather than drafting a quarterback this offseason, but also it's been enough to get Jonathan Brooks involved out there, return Adam Thielen from injured reserve, to see how he develops along with these pieces that they are probably bringing back next year as well. The issue is that it's Bryce Young against the Eagles defense now. So it's not a spot where, especially in one quarterback leagues, I'm looking to start him against. Since they returned from their bye, no defense is allowing less than 6 yards per attempt through the air other than the Eagles, who are at 5.5 per game in the league. Also, in that time, against running backs, the Eagles have stuffed runners to 4 yards per carry, 25th in the league, and just 1.1 yards before they make contact, which is 31st. Basically, every time a running back gets the ball, they immediately meet him within 1 yard, and they do not allow him to break tackles. They have been so stout. We even saw that against the Ravens this past week, where the Eagles ran their highest rate of zone coverage under Vic Fangio in any game this season, and they did that because what other team says, I bet we can stop Derrick Henry from 4 guys? Like, I know we can limit him, and they did so successfully. That's honestly the most interesting story for Philadelphia coming out of their bye, is just how with Cooper DeJean, they've turned a corner completely, and now have been arguably the best defense in the entire league heading into the postseason a month away. But that's also a concern for the Panthers offense. Also for Chuba Hubbard. Fumbled in overtime, yes. But look beyond that. He's still going to get touches because they just gave him the contract extension, and deservedly so. But before that fumble even, Jonathan Brooks was involved enough to render Chuba Hubbard to an RB2 or 3 for fantasy for the rest of the season. Brooks saw 100% of the team's running back targets, all 3 of them, and out-touched Chuba Hubbard 2-0 at the goal line as well. That's how we get this touchdown equity for our running backs for fantasy. So I am concerned about Chuba Hubbard no longer the RB1 that we were using him as while Jonathan Brooks was on injured reserve. For the Eagles, too, touchdown favorites at home against the Panthers. It's an obvious blueprint game script for Saquon Barkley and their running game, especially because we've seen now it's a team that oddly struggles in the first quarter, responds in the second quarter, and then so far over the last month, because their defense has been so good, especially at making halftime adjustments, there's just no volume for the Eagles offense in the second half. I would expect that again here against the Panthers. We're obviously starting Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, who now has a 30% target share in every game he's played this year, but I'm just not sure what the volume is or the ceiling is, again, as they continue to just dominate on defense, and we expect them to win by double-digit points against this Panthers team.
Looking forward to that one, certainly, with the Eagles being on a roll. Okay, this is a juicy matchup for fantasy. Jameis Winston against Russell Wilson. The Browns and the Steelers. John, these were the 2 biggest quarterbacks in Week 13.
And Jerry Jeudy, a career high in receiving yards, over 250, that everyone saw on primetime as well. Although, it was funny from Sean Payton because while Patrick Surtain was in coverage on Jeudy only had 2 catches for 20 yards. The thing is, Surtain doesn't travel to the slot. Only 5% of his coverage snaps all year have come from the slot. And so the Browns and Kevin Stefanski then instead moved Jeudy around, including to the slot, and Surtain just didn't go there. I don't know why Peyton didn't allow him to travel, since he was doing such a good job in defending Jeudy while that was his role. But it's a different game, I will say, for Jameis Winston. I still have faith in him if you're using him for Superflex leagues as a QB2 in fantasy, because he has had the volume. Now 41 pass attempts in 4 of his 5 starts in place of Deshaun Watson. But we're not expecting 84 plays and 58 pass attempts again, as the Browns had on Monday night. And remember, Bo Nix's struggles this year have been against pressure, which the Browns, or Bo Nix struggles this year have been against pressure, I'm moving over to, have been against pressure. And for the Steelers, they are getting Alex Highsmith back. And so remember, they were a top 5 unit in creating pressure whenever Alex Highsmith was on the field, and they were bottom 5, 30th in the league whenever Alex Highsmith was not available. This is also a Jameis Winston, a quarterback who has struggled under pressure too, and against zone coverage, the last time we saw Jameis Winston play against a defense that was primarily scheming zone coverage, that was the Chargers game. That was the one he struggled with immensely. And the Steelers run the 3rd highest rate of zone coverage as well. Only Anthony Richardson and Aiden O'Connell have completed a lower rate of their passes against zone this year. So I am a little bit worried about Jameis Winston, despite having the passing volume. As I was accidentally trickling off to earlier, now I want to get to Russell Wilson, because that's the side I'm really excited about here. Cleveland's, what they do best, as I mentioned earlier, is creating pressure at the league's highest rate. And that's how they limited Bo Nix to only 12.2 fantasy points as the quarterback 27 on the week. But that's not Russell Wilson. That's the thing here, because even if you're able, the Browns, to get pressure on Russell Wilson, he's averaged 8.2 yards per attempt, second best in the league when pressured. The Browns have also allowed the 3rd most completions, 20 yards downfield, as a defense that leaks many explosive plays, and Russell Wilson has completed a league-high 53% of his passes when throwing 20 yards downfield. That's what he wants to do. That's where he wants to go, to both George Pickens and Calvin Austin. Calvin Austin suffered a concussion last week for the Steelers as well, so you would think it's finally time for this offense to get Mike Williams involved off the bench. So a little less faith in Jameis Williams and the Browns' passing offense in this game, but I still think Russell Wilson and the Steelers' offense can get the job done.
Absolutely love the holiday season, because it's a great time to get together with family and friends. Smirnoff is the world's #1 vodka and official vodka partner of the NFL. This year, there's more opportunities to watch football and make delicious Smirnoff cocktails than ever before. We just had Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Now we'll have the Saturday games, the Christmas games, obviously Sundays. This holiday season, when you're enjoying the game and your cocktails, please make sure to drink responsibly. Take a minute, make a plan, never drive impaired. Smirnoff, we do game days. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Raiders, Bucks, rematch of that Super Bowl back in 2002. John, what do you got?
So Las Vegas, and 3 games under interim offensive coordinator Scott Turner, has been a pass-happy offense. And that makes the most sense whenever you look at their personnel. And they have Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers dominating through the air. Brock Bowers now averaging 13 targets in 3 games out of the Raiders' bye. And it is admittedly a good matchup for Aiden O'Connell. Not only leaning into the pass-happy scheme the last 3 weeks with 142 passes to only 50 running back carries in that time, but if you take away Tommy DeVito's performance against the Bucs a couple weeks ago, Tampa Bay has allowed at least 23.5 fantasy points to 5 surrounding quarterbacks. So I do have faith and hope here that Aiden O'Connell, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers can all have terrific games. And it's also probably because what we're expecting to get from the Bucs offense. Out of their bye now the last couple of weeks, we have seen them lean not only into more running back usage, but into Bucky Irving in particular. Bucky now has a season high in touches in back-to-back games, including 28 this past week, and has 9 of 11 targets, running back targets, in that 2-week span as well. Sean Tucker came out of their bye with a couple of goal line carries, but actually since he fumbled on the goal line a few weeks ago, he hasn't had a single touch since. And that's what allowed Bucky Irving to out-touch Rachaad White 28-11. So Bucky Irving continues to be the RB1 there, someone you're very excited to have for fantasy in the postseason. And then, of course, they sprinkle in Rachaad White. The player I will say I'm becoming a little bit worried about is Cade Otton, because we saw in 7 games without Mike Evans, Cade Otton was a top 12 tight end who they used both in the red zone and end zone, just a big-bodied guy they could scheme touchdowns to, and that's why he averaged 13.5 fantasy points per game. But now we have 4 starts with Mike Evans, and in those starts, Cade Otton only averaging just over 6 fantasy points per game. It's an entirely different outlook when Mike Evans is on the field. Even logically, when you step back, you say, okay, of course, when both of those guys are available for them, Baker Mayfield is definitely going to throw to Mike Evans in the red zone, not Cade Otton. So I am, for fantasy, thinking, just like Kyle Pitts, we should probably find someone to pick up off waiver wires rather than pretending Otton is a tight end 1 for the fantasy playoffs and moving forward.
Ooh, that's interesting, because for a while there, it felt like Otton was on an absolute roll.
Yeah.
Here's what everybody needs to do. You need to make sure that you are subscribing to the Fantasy Feast RSS feed, because John and I are about to record episode 2, which will drop bright and early tomorrow morning, shortly after midnight. That way you know you never miss an episode, especially, to his point, with the fantasy football playoffs coming up. Episode 2, we got 6 games that we still want to get through. We might even have a conversation about all these teams with buys, what it means with the playoffs coming up. For right now, though, I'm stuffed but ready for dessert.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.